Hello everyone, welcome. We're just going to give a short presentation on the effects of shifted sleep states on the different sexes. Our research is based on two key pieces of background information. The first being that in shifted sleep states, such as the daylight saving time transition or the DST transition, lots of negative effects can be observed. The main ones that we looked at in this was an increase in fatal road traffic accidents and an increased incidence of myocardial infarctions in the preceding days. The second was that sex differences have also been identified in shifted sleep states in general. So from these two pieces, we generated our aims, which were to assess the initial impact of the daylight saving time transition, and then to look at how the different sexes adjusted to the daylight saving time transition. We also recognized that chronotype could be a confounding factor in our study, so we also set out to look at how the chronotype may be affecting our results. We think this research can be significant because everyone experiences this every year and in jet lag as well, so it can be used to influence public health guidelines in the future surrounding jet lag and shifted sleep states. It's quite novel research, so we think it could provide further avenues of research, and it can be used to raise awareness for the public in how to deal with driving and health surrounding shifted sleep states. So for our study, the daylight saving time transition for this year came 25th of March, and we collected data on the 25th and 26th. We split our data collection teams into two, and we collected our data on Exhibition Road using two questionnaires, which was a short data questionnaire and a long data questionnaire. Over the 2 days, we collected a total of 528 pieces of data. And once we had collected it all, we then went and generated our aims and outcomes, which, as we mentioned earlier, are to assess the difference in initial impact of the daylight saving time transition, the adjustment, and then what effect chronotype may have on our findings. So once we had generated our aims, we then went back to our questionnaires and extracted the relevant questions, which we've listed here. These were mostly surrounding how sleepy the participants were, what their chronotype were, and their sleep and how long they slept for, and how long, when they went to bed, and when they woke up in the morning. Once we had our data, we then tested it for normality and used appropriate data tests for each different set of data we had.
Okay, so our data produced some very interesting findings. So firstly, we asked people whether they felt sleepy or not the day directly after the transition on the Sunday, and we found that females were significantly sleepier than males. However, when we repeated the same question on the Monday, we found that this difference had actually disappeared, and there was no significant difference between the two groups. So building on from this, we wanted to see if there were any differences in behavioural habits or the things males and females had done differently over those 2 days, which could help explain our findings. So we firstly plotted this graph, which shows the waking times and the bedtimes of males and females over the 2 days. And we found, although there was no significant difference in the waking times, females had actually slept significantly earlier on the Sunday night as reported on the Monday. And in addition, when we plotted the second figure, showing the change in the number of hours of sleep from Sunday to Monday, we found that females had also slept for significantly longer compared to males. So we think that here, females are in some way compensating for the fact that they were feeling sleepy the day before in order to catch up with males by the Monday. And then, as mentioned before, we thought that chronotype could potentially have a big impact on our findings. So we wanted to analyse data based around this to see what impact it was having. So firstly, we got people to report their chronotype as either, self-report as either a morning lark, regular robin, or evening owl. And then also we asked them whether they felt sleepy or not. And here we can see a significantly greater proportion of owls felt sleepy compared to the other two groups. However, when we then went on to plot the second graph, which showed the proportions of males and females in each group, although there was different numbers of people in general in the groups, you can see that actually there was no significant difference in any of the proportions in the groups. Hence, we don't think chronotype affected our study.
So, in conclusion, this was a novel study using questionnaires to obtain data on the impact of the daylight saving time transition on males and females. So our key conclusions were that the initial impact is actually greater on females, which is what we hypothesized based on previous literature. We also found that females take longer to adjust to the daylight saving time transition and the effects of it, and as there was a greater proportion of females who were sleepy on the Sunday morning. And then Sunday night, the females slept longer and earlier, meaning that by Monday morning, there was no significant difference. We also concluded that self-reported chronotype was not a confounding factor in our study. So we did identify several limitations with our study. We realized that the responses to the questionnaires were very subjective, and also some of them may not be accurate, as people may not report their bedtime, wake time, and sleepiness accurately. We also recognize that there is not currently an accurate measure of sleepiness, and this may have affected our results. Our sample also may not have been representative, as although we interviewed 528 people, this was out of about 10,500 people who were there on Exhibition Road that day, and we calculated this according to the total numbers of visitors for each museum on Exhibition Road. So this was only 5% of the total people who were there. We also recognise that there may have been selection bias when selecting our participants, and there was no inclusion and exclusion criteria in our study. Also, we didn't have information on a lot of confounding factors such as age, presence of children in the family, or any sleep-related disorders. So we thought about how to take our study further. To do this, we could repeat it over several years and collate the data. We could also refine our questionnaire to account for the confounding factors that I just mentioned. And we could also repeat the study over a normal Sunday, Monday to use as a control and compare the results. We could also repeat the study next year, both in March and October, to see the difference when clocks go back versus when they go forward, and when people gain an hour of sleep versus losing an hour of sleep. So to answer our original question, indeed women do actually have it worse off after the daylight saving time transition. However, they do quickly adjust. So now we welcome any questions about our study. Thank you very much for listening.
I'd like to open the paper for questions, and I'll offer Deborah the first question, but I also will echo what she said earlier too. Please feel free to put your hands up from the front to the back of the room.
I may have missed it, but did you control for the time of day that you asked whether they were sleepy or not? Because obviously that changes throughout the day, and maybe you questioned the females earlier than the males, or.
So what we did was basically we had 2 sessions each day, one in the AM and one in the morning and one in early afternoon as well. And we had people all the way up and down Exhibition Road collecting data.
Those sessions were the same time on both days, and then we collated the data. So I think that we did account for it. That was your question, right?
You mean, but quite a large block.
Yeah,
really.
yeah. We did 2 sort of 1-hour blocks, one in the morning, one in the afternoon,
Okay.
and then collated the data on each day.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any evidence that might suggest that men might be less likely to say that they're sleepy than women? Because they might perceive it as a sign of weakness, maybe? I'm not sure.
So yes, that was one of the limitations of our study. The responses were quite subjective, and we couldn't always say anything about their accuracy.
Do you think you might follow up with maybe a non-subjective test of sleepiness? Yeah, go ahead. I
mean, to do something like that would be quite tricky with how we were doing it and what we were doing it with. It would be interesting to see, but we would get a lot smaller sample size in that case. Mm-hmm. But it might be interesting to see in a more objective manner how directly after the change, with the same people, seeing like this small group of men, this small group of females, and see how it changes essentially.
Hi, thank you for the great talk. It's very interesting. Do you have a hypothesis why women might be feeling more sleepy?
So we're not sure exactly. We have read a bit about like hormonal changes, and obviously we know that male and female brains work very differently. But we also wonder whether it's to do with the fact that a lot of our participants were people standing in the queue to the museums with little children, and whether that sort of thing had like impacted our results. So that's potentially one reason. Other than that, we're not really too sure.
I could add that fathers also line up with their kids at museums and the like. Okay. We will pass the baton on. So thank you very much for your presentation.